Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. If you've been listening for years and now watching on the Salem News Channel, you know that we use the music from a television series about Washington, D.C.'s dark side for introducing David Drucker, not because he's part of the dark side of D.C., but because he covers it. And there is no darker art than redistricting. David, the redistricting wars are moving into full gear in Texas and California. I'm hoping it spreads to Ohio and Indiana and Florida and Missouri and New Hampshire and Nebraska. What's the state of play and who's going to win if everyone gets their knives out?
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, redistricting on the one hand has become such a finely tuned technological art that even though gerrymandering has existed almost as long as the Republic, and both parties have been a part of it and used it, what technology allows map makers to do with districts is something that they, couldn't do 100 years ago. You could probably carve a four-unit fourplex into four different districts.
Hadn't thought about that. You're right.
How good they are at it. So what you're going to see, obviously, is in Texas, now that they are able to get a quorum and Democrats have returned to the state, you'll see a new map there. I have talked to Republicans. Let's start with Texas. Obviously, Republicans are very optimistic there, some of them. But I've talked to other Republicans who worry that if this midterm election is rough for the GOP because there is a Republican in the White House, then it's not going to be the boon in seats that some Republicans imagine, and they even think that more seats than otherwise would have been could be competitive for Democrats. All right, that's Texas. That you could go one of two ways. Then you've got California, which is really the only place where Democrats can realistically respond. And even though Governor Newsom had to get an initiative on the ballot in a special election for this November, because Democrats have a 2/3 majority plus in the legislature, they're going to be able to do that and put sort of an emergency constitutional amendment adjustment on the ballot. And you'll see, upwards of 100 million, maybe on both sides, spent on this. And I've talked to some Republicans that say, listen, people don't like politicians drawing their own lines. They don't like gerrymandering. California, as you know, has an independent commission, even though it doesn't really result in seats existing to the percentages of the electorate. It's still largely a Democratic map. However, I've talked to other Republicans who say this is all going to be about Newsom versus Trump and Democrats versus Trump. And as long as Democrats can get that message across to the voters of California, there are more than enough of them to pass this. In which case, you then have potentially a +5 Democratic map, although a couple of seats would be competitive, and maybe you only end up at +2.
I'm gonna stipulate that it's going to win, David. You and I are ex-Californians, and we know how strong the Democratic Party is, and we know the machine in L.A. and the machine. So I'm going to stipulate that it wins. Have they had enough time to actually carefully draw the 4-unit condo, which I think I'm going to steal from you? Can they, or they have rushed this? They have not done. I mean, they might have fed it into Grok or something, but do you think they've had enough time to do it well?
Well, I think that they have had enough. I think we don't know for sure, but theoretically they have. I will say that they took about as much time as Texas took. I mean, look, getting back to the Texas idea for a minute, this was a creation of the White House that bypassed the National Republican Congressional Committee, the NRCC, bypassed the Texas Republican Congressional Delegation, went straight to Governor Abbott in the legislature. None of them were comfortable with it, but when President Trump asked Republicans to jump, people just tend to say how high. And so they found a good map maker, not necessarily their first choice, but a very good map maker. He moved quickly and drew the maps rather quickly. The Democrats in California, and there was a good article in Politico, who I have to credit here, on Paul Mitchell, who was their map maker, who was supposed to be some sort of map making, so map drawing and data savant, who I have heard of and I have talked to in the past, although not recently, got to work quickly for them. So I think all things being equal here, the maps are the maps. And then the question is, Ohio, I think you put aside because the law in Ohio already called for a change in the map before the next census. Can they squeeze another seat out of Indiana or Missouri or both? Possibly. New Hampshire, I would take off the table. Kelly Ayotte, the new governor there, like her predecessor, Chris Sununu, isn't interested in messing with redistricting in too partisan a fashion. And that's probably why Chris Sununu won 4 elections in a row. They served 2-year terms there. So I think this really is about Texas versus California. Maybe Republicans get an extra seat or 2 somewhere else. But again,
Danny
it's
Perez
also
in
about
Florida,
the
if I interrupt you, Speaker Perez in Florida has a sort of a deficit with Trump people. He can make that deficit up statewide, thinking statewide down the line, if he puts through a new map that adds Republicans. And there's opportunity in Florida. What do you think?
Well, there could be. I think the question is, and it's funny, I interviewed Speaker Perez earlier this year for a story that I was down in Tallahassee reporting. It depends on whether he cares about anything beyond his current post. A lot of Republicans I've talked to in Florida tell me he doesn't care, and that he sort of has this old-fashioned notion that I'm the Speaker of the House, it's my branch of government, and you do your thing, I'm going to do mine. Doesn't mean pressure can't be brought to bear by his colleagues, but I think I think look at this as a maybe, but don't look at necessarily Perez as thinking there's something he wants to gain out of this. Although, things could have changed since the last time I talked to him.
I want to ask you about Nebraska with less than a minute. I will add this about Perez, though. He's one of the most gifted political actors I've ever interviewed, and I've interviewed him probably a half dozen times. He sparkles. He just has the juice. What about Nebraska? Not only ought they to redistrict the Don Bacon seat, they ought to change the state so that the Democrats don't get an electoral vote when it's an overwhelmingly Republican state. Will they do it?
Well, yeah, if they do that, though, Maine will follow suit, and there are enough Democrats in Maine to do that. Right, but it doesn't change the calculus, is my point. So it's interesting, but it doesn't really change the playing field.
So, end of the day, we wake up on the morning of November X, 2026. Who's running the House?
It's all about the atmospherics. Listen, Republicans have a very thin majority, so Democrats have the upper hand. On the other hand, there are fewer competitive seats than there used to be. And, we saw 2022 look like it should be a strong Democratic year, a strong Republican year, and it was not so strong. So let's see where we are a year from now.
Yeah, I've been a pessimist for the Republicans because I am a Republican for a long time. I'm starting to change because Trump's off to such a great start. David M. Drucker, thank you for joining me. Follow him on X at David M. Drucker. He is